technically, usually we're doing it for a reason. We want something. And then, we know when we got a result. I mean, I can think of my most recent fail, Evocation, was just pretty straightforward. There were a lot of promises made to me, but I had to do certain things before a certain time. And I kind of wanted to confirm that the Spirit actually knew what it's talking about and capable of doing what it said it was going to do. So I asked him, what's gonna be the score in the Giants game on Sunday? And I got an answer which was completely wrong. So I'm just like, okay, fuck you, I'm not doing this. Like, you can't even tell me the outcome of a football game. How are you supposed to be able to do like all this other stuff that you're claiming you're able to do? And I really do encourage people when they're communicating with spiritual entities to do stuff like that. Just like an easily verifiable question, like something that you can concretely tell this happened and that happened or whatever, because that's a valuable thing to have. And often, even if it's nothing related to what you actually want from the ritual itself, if the entity claims to have this information, have these abilities, it should be able to give you that information. Like, just reasonably, that's what you would expect. Because, like I said, when you get a direct result, it is reinforcing. It's nice to actually see something show up and know that you're dealing with something, you're not just talking to yourself. But then again, it's also easy to get a little bit seduced by that and carried away because you see there's something there, because you can tell you're interacting with an entity. It's tempting to not be too critical of it because you don't want to question it. You don't want to lose that, or to think that your magic isn't working or stuff like that. But as many people have pointed out, if you look at Crowley's records, and Crowley's arguably the most... Sorry?
No, continue. I'll ask the question.
I would say that Crowley is arguably the most successful ceremonial magician out there. I mean, he basically, like, comparable only really to John Dee and Edward Kelly, because he did create a lot of change, I think. If you look at what he was doing during his life, and he didn't see a lot of it during his life, because he was trying to do big things. If you look what he was doing in the Paris working, if you look what he was doing in that whole sort of time, trying to restore the worship of the pagan gods, I think in a way he was very successful with this kind of stuff. Although I think that it re-emerged in a very different form. I see, and I made the reference to music before, and I really see music as being this whole Dionysian revival that we have experienced in our culture, where it's so prevalent, so much of a part of our culture in a way that it really wasn't in Crowley's life. And even that's huge. That's huge.
So when you were talking about talking to the spiritual entities, like, do you actually see them? Do you hear them? Do you use some sort of divination tool to figure out what's going on?
For me, personally, it's been different on different times, different entities.
Like, for instance, with the Giants game score, how did you know that they told you the Giants game score? Did you?
Oh, that was just an impression that I got in my head.
Okay.
I'm personally a writer, so I do automatic writing a lot.
Okay, so it was like, it's okay if you're using a secondary tool to try to...
Yeah.
It's not like you're supposed to just hear voices and see...
No. Although that happens from time to time. And from time to time you see stuff. I can only think of one occasion that I physically saw something there. So that I would say that's extremely rare. A lot of people, that's what they like to use incense for, is because if you get a goetic spirit or something like that, it does create a kind of a disturbance in the air, so it's easier to see if you've got smoke there, basically.
So with the, like, how do you, does it feel different when it's an impression from just a thought that popped in your head? Like,
yeah.
Is it a different sensation, or?
Well, it's a totally different sensation.
Okay.
And I think that part of this has to do with the particular entities that we're dealing with are distinct personalities. So they're going to communicate with you differently, and then it also has to do with the way you process that information. I mean, like Crowley gives the example at one point of, he's like, one of his students, Layla Waddell, was a violinist. She was a musician, and music happens to be under the sphere of Jupiter, and he's like, I am not proficient with any music. So if I invoke the god Jupiter and I have a conversation with him, the conversation and the relationship and the way we communicate is going to be totally different when I'm communicating with that god than when this musician is communicating with them, because they have this particular common ground, whereas Crowley has other forms of common ground with Jupiter that will...
So is it just through sort of synchronicity and signs and divination?
Yeah.
just feelings and stuff like that.
There's certain entities that I find it's a lot more reliable to use some other divinatory tool, like the tarot or something like that, depending what language of divination you speak the best, really. And I do find, again, it comes down to personal aspects of the gods. For example, bizarrely, when I talk to the goddess Ishtar, she really likes to use the I Ching, and I'm not really sure where that comes from because it's not remotely Babylonian, but whatever, like that's how she likes to talk to me, so that's how I talk to her.
So is there a set way of writing invocations, or like a set structure, or it just depends on the tradition you're in?
It kind of depends on the tradition, but I tend to go back to what I was saying before about what the Enochian angels were saying, that the best invocations come spontaneously from the heart, where you really kind of just...
But words have power though, right? So
Oh,
you just
absolutely.
kind of say something, like, what if it, what if there's a loophole in there somewhere?
That's problematic. Actually, what I find, at least if you're working with infernal entities or demons, the good old-fashioned traditional demonic contract sealed with the drop of blood is definitely a good way to go, and that way you have time to think everything out, and you look for loopholes and look for stuff like that, because they will try to find loopholes. I don't really think it's because they're malicious, because I don't really see, I mean, demon is obviously a highly pejorative term, but, I think the reason these spirits get this reputation is because they tend to just, if there's a crack for them to slip through, they will slip through that crack. It's not out of malice, but that's just their nature, essentially.
Are there certain smells when you're working with infernals?
Oh, that's a good one.
Because I've been noticing certain things around. I don't work with infernal spirits, but I have suspicions of people that I know that do, and there's certain smells that I notice that are kind of consistent around them. Like the smells of this like soury, like sulfur or pneumonia almost, or maybe that's just folk tradition.
No, I've definitely found that with goetic spirits, and certain spirits of this nature particularly do love the smell of, like sulfur, a perfect example.
Like the smell of like really, like pneumonia, like
yeah.
urine.
And people do notice changes in temperature when a spirit tends to arise. I haven't experienced that as much myself, but for some people that's a very consistent thing that happens. It'll get very cold suddenly, and that's kind of how they know that the eagle has landed or whatever.
Well, in the conjurations, it always says without foul odor.
Yeah, that and I've noticed too in like angelic workings, there's a very sweet, pleasant smell that shows up. This can be problematic because a lot of people like to use incense, and I definitely think that that's a good idea. It depends kind of where you live. I can't burn incense in my apartment myself. Also, I have asthma, so I don't really like sitting around in smoke-filled rooms. It's not pleasant. And I think actually you do find a lot of a tradition of respiratory problems with people who've done this historically. Just because of that, they are sitting around for hours in smoke-filled rooms, which is not necessarily the best thing for you.
Is there a good substitution for incense?
You can get lots of. I would use like essential oils are good. Because even if you just put a few drops of oil in like a candle or something like that, you can get a decent smell, or even just to smell a rag or an object that's been soaked in that. That's good, because just the sense of smell is very powerfully connected to our memory. So that's a really good way to solidify some of those relationships that I was talking about before in terms of integrating the pentagram and the hexagram in day-to-day life. To associate with I mean, I personally, as a writer, I use smell constantly. Like I have particular oils that I use when I'm working on particular stories or particular characters and stuff like that, just to evoke that idea of that person. And just by constantly doing it consistently to create that association, you can get to a point very quickly that it just takes like a sniff, and all of a sudden you're mentally in the right space. Color is really good for that too. Like there's a reason. I personally find the Golden Dawn system of colors to be incredibly gaudy. I'm not a huge fan of the way it looks. However, we do make mental associations with color. So whatever system you use, it's good to just have a consistent one. I personally use colored lights a lot, and I find that helps the mood quite a bit without burning candles and creating fire hazards. So that.
Oh, alright. Sorry, I just yawned as soon as I went to ask. So I get in a lot of conversations with people, and I read a lot of things where they're kind of, from a thalamic perspective, saying that our HGA has us exactly where we need to be at all times.